And we're doing Tanya, Rabbi. Say we're at the end of Perek Hey. That's really what we're holding. We're at the end of Perek Hey. I'm going to start again from the middle of page 18. From the middle, I'm going back. And we're going to read till the end of the Perek, and hopefully, I'm planning, Mitzvah today we'll actually start Perek Vov. That's the plan, okay? With Hashem's help. Last week's class was a bit in the air, I think, but I think also was important. What I focused on last week's class was I brought two different concepts of Lishma in Chassidus. Right, there's something called Teira Lishma, learning Teira Lishma. Lishma means for the sake of Teira itself. And of course there's a lot of different understandings of what it means to learn Teira Lishma. But Chassidus has everything in a Pnimi. Chassidus speaks about everything on a very deeper level. So I told you, and of course I didn't make anything up, I repeated what it says in Sfarim, it says here, it says in Chassidus, in other places, that there are two ideas of Lishma. One idea of Lishma, the one we have over here, is L'kasher nafshe ba'havaya, right? L'kasher, in some places, L'kasher nafshe v'daite ba'havaya. Do state, L'kasher nafshe la'Hashem. It's on page Yud, it's, 10 lines down, near the end of the page. So one Lishma means that when I learn Torah, I become connected to the Eibishter. But there's a very different Lishma, which you have in Samach Vav, and in Kutei Torah, and Torah Eid, all over Chassidus. That Lishma is L'shem HaTorah. That a Yid learns Torah Lishma to do the Torah a favor, Chamol gehet a Maise. In the Tzela Maise, mehr gar nicht. Chamol gehet a Maise. I used to daven by the police station. I davened there for a decade. By Rabbi Reuben. He just passed away. He was not a Lubavitcher. He was a Benon Shel Kadosh El. He was an Einikal from every Rebbe. He was an Einikal somehow. And he was a Moirendik of Al-Maisa. He knew so much. And he liked me. And I would listen to him all day if he would talk. Because he had Gishbaka things to say. He was a Chassidish Yid. He was not a Lubavitcher, but he was a Chassidish Yid. You don't see a lot of such people in America. Chassidish Yidin without Chassidus Chabad. He was a Chassidish Yid. With them was a Chassidish Yid. His number one characteristic was V'ahavta l'recha kamoicha. You don't see such people. Anyway, so he had many yichus. The yichus that was sich berimt, the yichus that he was the most proud of, was Zidichayv. There's a Chassidus called Zidichayv. There was a Heshel Zidichayv, and Ateres Tzmi. He was a Talmud from Remen, maybe the Chayzer. He was a Moedik HaMekubal, that Teres Tzvi was. The Teres Tzvi did not have any sons, he had only daughters. So when he passed away, his Mamalama came in were his nephews, his sister's children. Tzvishen Zeig, as the Kamane is probably the name that's most familiar to it. Rabbi Isaac Kamane, the Rebbe used to call the Kamane, the Rebbe gehalten for the Kamane. In fact, when you look in our Siddur, in the very back of the Siddur, we have two Braka Mishnayis. Two Braka Mishnayis that you learn for a yard site. You know what I'm talking about? In the very back. So the first one is Nerush. What is Nerush in it? The second one says, and it's in our Nusach. And that's the pay that you actually say. Nobody learns the 24th Perek of Caleb. Everyone learns Ayin the Mekvais. Yeah, that's the command. It's not the Ruzhin. The Ruzhin is the Perek before Shleisha Trisen. The Rebbe Mistam said both Braka Mishnayis, but I don't know how many people who have said Kaddish said both Brakim. The command is in our Siddur. The Kamana. The Rebbe used to mention the Kamana when he get to the Rabbi film. The Rebbe spoke to Sikha about the Rabbi film. The Rebbe said that the Kamana rise that today wearing a Rabbi film is Aloch. In the name of the Arizal. So the Rebbe gehalten stark from the Kamana. His name was a Yitzhak Eisen Kamana. He was a Moedik HaMekubal with a lot of Sfarim. Anyway, so this is all Arum. The Choyve, the Ateres Tzri, their uncle, was a Moedik, it's a Kochshak in Kabbalah in Zayir. So the story that he told me was, there's a lot of stories that I don't want to go into complicated things. I'll just tell you the Maise. On his deathbed, Al Eres Dvoy, Farna Vege von der Welt, hat Azogeton, he took the Sefer HaZayir in his hands. He said, took the Sefer HaZayir, And he said to the Sefer, Zoy ha-zoyer ve'vet tichnoch ha-zoy lenen ha-zeh v'yich. That's what he said. Who is ever going to learn you again like I did? Now, if Stam Yid says it, we call him a Yesh and a Metzias and a Dafa Nifra that are Bifnei Atzmai. He was a tzaddik, Mastama tzaddik Gomer. I don't know, I'm not a measure of tzaddikim. He was a groise tzaddik. It's nicht gelecht. It's not, he wasn't a Balgaive, like you and I. Fan by tzaddikim, as he by Rashbi steht. Anosim da b'yalma, b'chad k'tiris katarna. I'm not comparing him to Shmei Choy, but he was a big tzaddik. And that's his oisprach. He said to the Zayir, I did you a favor. I learned you. And again, I'm just telling this story, and I only want to bring out the Shvach and Shayisal. I don't want to be anything. But this is in Chassidus. That the highest madreg of Limud HaTeira is you're learning Teira to tondem Teira HaTeira. You're not learning the Teira because you need the Teira. You're learning the Teira because the Teira needs you. It's called Teira L'Shma. That's the literal title of the word L'Shma, L'Shem HaTeira. And there's a whole chassidus on this. That it says in Sfarim, and the whole shaila which sefer it is, every Ma'ameh chassidus brings a different source. That David HaMakasha Teira Shal Ma'ileh HaKadosh Baruch. The David HaMelech learned Teira to connect the Teira to the Eibishter. And this Teira Chazal. So the shaila becomes Teira has to be connected to the Eibishter. Teira is the Eibishter. We have in our Peirik Daled that I said Kulachad. So the explanation is that Teira is called Oyer. And Teira is called Chochmah. Teira is the Eibishter's light, and the Eibishter's wisdom. A Yid is mamish one with the Eibishter. So when a Yid learns the Teira, he brings into the Teira something which is higher than the Teira is by itself. And there's a big arichas in Samach Vav, in my mother Madatten, after Pesach, noch Pesach, Farshvus, in Samach Zayin, where the Rebbe Rashab explains this is why we say that the Rabbanon is higher than the Deraisa. And the minig is even higher than the Rabbanon. And jeder Asmachta is emes and Deraisa. Because this is a Yid learning the Teira. The Eibush gave us the Teira. The Chachamim made Takonis, and they made Gzedis, and they made Shtiyagim, and they made Minhagim, and they're adding something to the Teira. Where they're taking it from? So in one aspect, they're taking it from digging Hafach, Ba'afach, or the Gula, but they're going in deeper and deeper in the Teira. And in another level, it's coming from the Yiddish and Neshama, the Shadish is higher than the Teira itself. You understand?
So a Yid is a mashpia in the Torah?
That's right. That's why it says, Klas Kishem, you know this. A Yid takes from the Teira, and then he becomes a mashpia into the Teira. 2 steps. So there's 2 Lishmas. So here in Peirik Hey, the Alter Rebbe brings the lower Lishma. Lishma, L'kasha, Nafshe Ba'avaya. Lishma, why? Because in the beginning of Tanya, the whole focus of the Tanya is that Yiddishkeit helps us get closer to the Eibishter. Later in the Tanya, the Rebbe is going to start speaking not how we get closer to the Eibishter, but how we bring the Eibishter into the world. Beginning of Peirik Lamed. That's a tiferet, it's higher. In other words, the idea that a Yid connects to the Eibishter through Yiddishkeit, so the Yid is lower than Yiddishkeit, and Yiddishkeit helps have a relationship with the Eibishter. So we're learning now, Peirik Dal and Peirik Hey, chapters 4 and 5. The Rebbe says, why does a Yid need Yiddishkeit? Because the Neshama by itself is hidden. And in order for a Yid to have a relationship with the Eibishter, and of course the highest level of that is to reveal the Yiddish and Neshama, it needs to have mitzvahs. That mitzvahs are a levush, they're a garment that a Yid wears that connect him to Atma Seitei. And Teira is mozen v'gam levush, as we discussed over the last few classes. Teira is also food. V'teirascha b'teich meyai, that when a Yid learns Teira, he brings the Teira inside himself. He becomes one with it. If you've been here every Sunday, it's embarrassing to say, but we had good classes. I don't always give such a... Peirik has Migalungin. It went quick and good. I told you the idea of, remember, of Yisparnis Minei in La Foshalom. Yisparnis Minei means that the Teira feeds you. And La Foshalom means that you feed the Teira. You're Mechadish Chadushim and Teira. This is all part of the Yichud. Shein Yichud Kamei, Nimtzakal Bagashmi, that Yid becomes so one with the Teira becomes his food. And it becomes his food to such an extent that he actually changes the Teira itself. So, as I tried, last week's class was on this idea. Now, one of the aspects that I brought up in last week's class is that here in this Prakim, mitzvahs are only a lavush. What does it mean? It's only a lavush. Lavush means a neshama in Gan Eden has oyer. A neshama that was in Gan Eden was here in this world, and goes back to Gan Eden has oyer. But the Oid is in the Beis HaMikdash. The Oid is in the Kedesh HaKadosh. The Neshama is not in the Beis HaMikdash. The Neshama is in the what's called the Hecholos, what's around the Beis HaMikdash. And the light shines from the Beis HaMikdash through those backwards windows you learn about in Tanakh to the world around. And the Neshama needs to be able to receive this light. That's why you have Levush. Mitzvahs are garments that conduct the Torah. That entire model is based on what's going on here in Tanya. If Yiddishkeit is for the sake of bringing me closer to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, so Torah is mazon, it's food, and mitzvahs are levush, it's a garment. And in Gan Eden, you have the schar of the Hasaga. You have a tainuk from the schar of the Hasaga, the tainuk of the Hasaga, from the Torah that you learned in the Kavanas HaMitzvahs that you did and so forth and so on. The other side of that coin is the idea we're going to have later in Tanya, Pedek Lamed Hey, and Ikin and Pedek Lamed Zayin. But the Rebbe is going to say that a mitzvah is atzmas umhus. A mitzvah is a piece of the Eibishter Mamish. It's not a garment that conducts oil. And then we're going to say that mitzvahs are actually higher than Torah. And we're going to speak about the Ma'ila of Asiyah. Asiyah. Mitzvahs are higher than Torah. Why? Because Torah is Ruchnius of Kolsov. Mitzvah Gashmius. I mean, we learned here Basi Lagani. Yeah. And in Basi Lagani, this year Perek Tes, the Rebbe says anything which has to do with Ruchnius is oil. Including his Kafia and including his Hapche. There's actually a minor where the Rebbe says that even Kabbalah Seil is Ruchnius. And Mesiras Nefesh is Ruchnius. The only thing which is Atzmos is the actual physical performance of a mitzvah. And this is much, much more than in Torah. So the way I presented it last week, and I'm just repeating this, I'm trying to summarize it, in case last week was a bit lofty, is that when you understand the other model of Lishma, the second Lishma, which is not here, that Lishma Kvayachal is Farneibish. The Lishma doesn't mean that I get closer to Hashem. But Vayachal Lishma means I'm doing the Eibishter a favor. And Miktaras they didn't sagen, aber they steht in Zeh, when it's based in Tanya, in Pedek Yud, and in Pedek Mamalef. The Rebbe brings, like a son who loves his father more than himself, and he's Yemaser Nafshe Aleim Lamisa. Gives himself away. V'nafshe v'ruche v'nishmas. This is the balance that I tried to create last week. That there's two Lishmas. There's Lishma for me, and there's Lishma for the Eibishter. And the Lishma for me, the Ikir is Teir, the Ikir is Ruchnius. And the mitzvah is only a Lavush. Then there's the Lishma for the Eibishter. The Lishma for the Eibishter is Fakert. The Lishma is to bring Hashem into this world. And in that Lishma, the mitzvah is higher than the Teir. Because you do a mitzvah, you bring Atzmos to bring the Eibishter himself down to a physical Asiyah. And of course, we learn in Chassidus that in Eilam Haba, Eilam Atchiyah, we're going to have that also. You understand? When it says here that in Gan Eden the mitzvahs are garments that conduct light, that's in Gan Eden, which is before Tchias HaMeisim. But in Tchias HaMeisim, these two concepts, if I may use these words, these two concepts of Lishma are going to converge, Takeh. And in Tchias HaMeisim, a Yid is not only going to have the Tainug HaSaga, the pleasure from the light of godliness that he created through a mitzvah that he did and the Torah that he learned, but we're going to experience the atmos of the mitzvah itself. You follow? You understand? So I'm repeating last week's class because I felt that I may have been a little bit abstract in the way I presented it. So these are the two sides. There's two Lishmas. Lishma for me, the eyes get closer to the Eibish, that's also Lishma. And Lishma for an Eibish, to connect the Torah to the Eibish, to bring the Eibish into the world, and so forth and so on. One Akuda, in light of the above, which you have in Tanya Pedek Mamalef, Tanya chapter 41, Pedek Mamalef. Pedek Mamalef is a very unusual Pedek. It really is. If you look at the totality of the Pedek, it really stands alone. It's in the middle of a conversation. He's talking about Ava V'Yid. He started from Ches, talking about Ava V'Yid. He goes through Pedek Nun. But there's something very, very unusual, Pedek Mamalef, chapter 41. And the way I see it, and this is just my opinion, and of course it's very limited, is that the first half of Pedek Mamalef speaks the lowest avodah possible. The second half of Pedek Mamalef speaks the highest avodah possible. That's how the Pedek is designed. The first half of the Pedek speaks about Yira, but the lowest Yira, the Yira of Kabbalah Seil, the Yira of Bittul, you understand, yeah? And he speaks two madreges in it, where you have a little bit of Yira and where you have no Yira, just Kabbalah Seil. The second half of the Pedek speaks the highest Ahava. That's how the Pedek goes. The first half is the lowest Yira, the second half is the highest Ahava, and then in chapter 42, Membeis, he starts again with Yira. Membeis is Yira, The beginning of Mem Gimel is Yira, and then the rest of Mem Gimel is Ahava, and Mem Dal is a different Ahava, and then Mem Hetel, Mem Tes is another Ahava, and Nun is Goran another Ahava. There's different Ahavas in Tanya. But that's how it works. Perek Mem Aleph has the lowest Yira and the highest Ahava. The highest Ahava is Mesidas Nefesh. The highest Ahava is Mesidas Nefesh. But when you learn the second half of Perek Mem Aleph in Tanya, the second half of chapter 41 in Tanya, the Alter Rebbe says the highest Ahava itself has two madrigas. That's how it's designed. That's the design of the Perek. There's a lower level and a higher level. And I'm going to tell them to you from lower to higher. The lower level of Ahava, of Mesidas Nefesh, is that a Yid is prepared to give his life for the Eibishter. A Yid is prepared to give away his life for the Eibishter. Yeah, hoye lo yisiyeh. The Rebbe Tamal gesagt, and the Rebbe Desher gesagt, is in America, that man reden wegen Mesidas Nefesh. The Rebbe said once, that the Friedrich Rebbe said, in America, if you talk about Mesidas Nefesh, you know where you got to talk about it? Because that's how close you get to it, Baruch Hashem. You understand? Mit Yotzi mit Nerei. So the Rebbe says, the lower level of Mesidas Nefesh is Yid giving himself away to the Eibishter completely. And the Alter Rebbe says, every Jew is holding witness. Every Yid, every single Yid. The idea of giving away your life for Hashem, yeah, the Yid helped by them. Everybody's holding by it. And he connects it to Lakai Neshama. He connects it to Lakai Neshama. Yeah? That it says, Va'ata osid litla mimeni, you will one day take it from me. So the Alter Rebbe says that when a Yid says to Lakai Neshama, his kavona is, Hareini meisa l'chamayati. I'm giving it to you now. It says in Tanya, in the end of Perek Mamal, Hareini meisa l'chamayati. It happens to be a little bit timely, a bit time sensitive, because we're still coming from Chavdal Davis. We're going to the Yutrat coming from Chavdal Davis. Chavdal Davis, I talked the same speeches in 5 different places. The Maisa Freidke. You know what I'm saying? Freide. I had a daughter. Her name was Freide. She was the oldest. She was probably 9 years older than the mother, maybe 10. She was the Alter Rebbe's Bechayra. She was the first. She was born before the Alter Rebbe met the Maggid. And the Alter Rebbe said about her unbelievable things. He said that she had a neshama from Alma de Dechura. The Dechura means a zochar, a man. This means a Rebbe. That's what it means. It doesn't mean a man versus a mashpia as opposed to a makabel. She was God Agahiv. The Alter Rebbe used to chassidus for her in private. There's actually a letter from her to the Mittel Rebbe in Yiddish, Ben Yoni Avoida. And she refers to Mittel Rebbe as Bruderl. It's just so. I mean, you're talking about after the Stalkas of the Alter Rebbe. There were a few months. She passed away 6 months after the Alter Rebbe. There was a letter that was written in between the Alter Rebbe's Stalkas, Chavdal Tevis. Her yard, I think, is Tezayin Sivan, the same year. So the story with her was, she was an incredible tzadkanius. She was a go'oina. The Alter Rebbe had a special connection to her. That the Nachum, her nephew, the Middle Rebbe's older son, said like this: Mele de Tate, my father, I say Mele in English, Mele, my father, my father had an incredible brain, and he was able to control the emotions of the loss of the Alter Rebbe. Aber Freidke, but Freide, she could not recover from the loss of her father. She died from it, Pashat. She could not recover from the stalkus of the Alter Rebbe. She was probably around 50. Alter Rebbe was 68 when he passed away. She was probably around 50, maybe a little younger. She had a family, by the way, she had children and so on. So she got sick. Alter Rebbe was nostalgic, she got sick. She got sicker and sicker and sicker, and then it was clear that she wasn't going to make it. So she called the Chaver Kadisha. And she told the Chaver Kadisha that they should bury her in the oil with the Alter Rebbe, in the oil. Now, to put anybody in the Alter Rebbe's oil is nit poshet, especially a woman. So they had no intentions of doing what she asked. But they told her yes, because you're not allowed to hurt the Gesesas, you could bring a kind of Misayu and so on. They lied to her. When it came the moment of the Histalkus, so she called a minyan. And they stood around her bed. And she said everything you have to say. She said Krishma, she said Vidu, there's a Mesidas Meidot that you have to say. All kinds of things. And then she starts saying Alakai Neshama. That's the connection to the Shia. And she said every word with an incredible hatoma. You know, Alakai. With every time you say, my God, yeah, my God. Yeah, Hashem, Kama. The way it's worded, you're talking to Hashem in first person. Alakai, God. Right? Or Alakai. There are occasions in davening where you talk, you don't say you or him, you speak to the first person, like I'm talking to you. Lakai, my God, yeah, the Neshama Shabita Heidi, the Neshama that you gave me is pure. Ata Verosa, you created it. Ata Yitzata, you formed it. V'ata Nefachta, you blew it into me. V'ata Meshamra B'kirbi, you preserve it within me. And then you say, V'ata Osed Little Mimeni, you're going to take it from me. So she said each one of these words with an incredible kavona. And when she said to the words, V'ata Osed Little Mimeni, she cried out, Ot Tateichku. She said to her father, I'm coming. This was her histalkus. She's with the Alter Rebbe. She's with the Alter Rebbe. They did exactly what they asked. Ad Kedei Kach, we're not even sure who's who. In Hadish, there's two places. One is the Alter Rebbe, one is the Alter Rebbe's daughter, and no one knows who it is. No one knows which is Amam Shapeh. But this time, V'ata Osid, the Alter Rebbe says in Tanya, V'ata Osid Litla Mimeni Hareinim, there's an infamous Sidus Nefesh, I'm giving away myself to you to the Eibishter. Yeah, and the Alter Rebbe is Mechadish in Tanya, an unbelievable thing. That any time, any Yid does any mitzvah, it's an infamous Sidus Nefesh. That's what it says in that Perek B'Malach, in that little shtickle. It's near the end of the painting. Any time any Yid does any mitzvah, it's infamous Sidus Nefesh of us. Val Eyev is Gufay. Yossi, sof kol sof, you like your body more, and you could use your time. It's a very big limud chus, you should know. The Alter Rebbe brings in his Maimonides often. The Alter Rebbe says in Tanya, any time any Jew does any mitzvah, it's Mesidus Nefesh. Did you know that? Any time any Yid, I could show it to you inside, any time does any mitzvah, it's even Mesidus Nefesh. Why? He could use his time for whatever he wants, and he's using it to Avodas Hashem. The Alter Rebbe brings a moedin dika limud chus. But this is the lower madregi. This is Lishma. Lakasha nafshe ba'avaya. I'm connecting myself to the Neighbor. Earlier in the Pedic, the Alter Rebbe brings a higher madrega. And the higher madrega, the Alter Rebbe says, Nitya deina half by them. Not everybody is holding by this. What's the higher madrega? The higher madrega is liyachta kochabrichu v'shchinte b'tachteinim. Which means that I do the Ratzon Ha'elyon not to satisfy my desire to become Momer HaKadosh Baruch Hu, but to bring the Eibishter into this world. And the Alter Rebbe says this is a higher madrega. And this is in Tanya Perek Yud, the Alter Rebbe called this Bnei Aliyah. It's the highest madrega of Tzaddik, Bnei Aliyah. So there's two, the Alter Rebbe brings two taichin, Shnei Me'ilim Mekone Echad. He brings two pshatim in what a Bnei Aliyah is, and then the Alter Rebbe says it's really the same thing. One taichin has to do with Birurim, and the other taichin, Bnei Aliyah, is Ezeo Chosadam Es Chasadim Kemi Im Kandilei. What's a chosid? That he's mischasadim koina. He's doing a chesed to the Eibishter. He's doing a chesed to the Eibishter. How do you do a chesed to the Eibishter? Im Kandilei. What's the meaning of the word kan? His nest. He can't see it. That how do you do a favor for the Eibishter? By making a dileis baruch v'tachtein. This the Alter Rebbe said this is a level of Mesidus Nefesh, which is not even by you. It's not even I'm connecting to the Eibishter through this act. Ich fear is the kavona, I'm fulfilling the purpose that the Eibishter wants. So here the Alter Rebbe says in chapter 41, now this is mentioned in two places, in chapter 10 and in chapter 41. So some of what I'm telling you is in Perek Yud, and some of what I'm telling you is in Perek B'Malach. Alter Rebbe says, Nitya deina half b'adinem. This is not everybody's B'meila. This is why we don't say L'Shem Yichud in the morning. We say Baruch Shabbos L'Shem Yichud, yeah. We don't say L'Shem Yichud L'Shem Shchinta L'Yachada before every mitzvah like they do in other Hasidus and they do by Sfatim. We do it only once a day. The Rebbe has a Sikh in Chelek Lametes, and look at the Sikhs where he says this. Other Kehilas, Sfardim, other Chassidim, every time they do a mitzvah L'Shem Yichud. They take on Man Chabad Siddur, they put on a talis in the morning so L'Shem Yichud. Half a page, just beautiful words, very beautiful words. Before they put on tefillin, they nachal L'Shem Yichud. I used to go to my grandfather to the Seder. Every cup of wine was L'Shem Yichud. Every matzah was L'Shem Yichud. Mother L'Shem Yichud. We don't do any of this. We say L'Shem Yichud once a day. Why? So the Rebbe says because not everybody's holding on that madrega. Because the L'Shem Yichud Kochabrichu Shchinta really means for the Eibishter. L'Yachta Kochabrichu Shchinta B'Tachteinim. And since we're not holding by it, so we don't do it. But on the other hand, Al Yoitzi Yodem Atzmei Min HaKlal. These are the Rebbe's words. Okay, I'm not holding by it. But there's something called Klal. Klal Yisrael. Klal Yisrael halt ba'alas. I personally, I am what I am. But as a member of the community of Klal Yisrael, I'm holding by everything. This is why, people don't realize this, this is why when we say L'Shem Yichud, we say the words B'Shem Kol Yisrael. Right? In the morning. We say L'Shem Yichud, Shavichu Shechint El Yachada, Shem Yud Kei V'Ad B'Chudeshtim. Why say B'Shem Kol Yisrael? What's B'Shem Yisrael? On behalf of all the Jewish people, who appointed you to say L'Shem Yichud? B'Shem Kol, you know what I'm talking about? And before Baruch Shama, every single day, we say L'Shem Yichud, and we finish with the words B'Shem Kol Yisrael. I don't know how it's translated in English. You look at the English, on behalf of the Klal Yisrael, who are you to speak for Klal Yisrael? So the Alter Rebbe says, you're not speaking for Klal Yisrael, you're speaking as a part of Klal Yisrael. I, as an individual, this is too high for me. But as a member of Klal Yisrael, every Yid is holding by every Yid, including the idea of Mesiras Nefesh, not Mesiras Nefesh, I should become one with HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Mesiras Nefesh, I should do what the Eibishter needs me to do. This is chapter 41. The second half of Perek Mav says both of these things. The Alter Rebbe says it backwards. The Alter Rebbe says the higher one first and the lower one second. I repeated to you backwards because I wanted to go in the order of Malmata Lamayla. But the point is, that's consistent with the class I gave you last Sunday, that there's two lishmas, you understand. And the first half of Tanya, everything is for us. Everything is for us, we should become connected to the Neibishter. Later in Tanya, it's everything for Neibishter. And I told you this many times, you know, we live in the Deir HaShvi, right? We're the 7th generation. And with the Rebbe's Chassidim, Baruch Hashem, yeah, thank the Neibishter and their father. And we are so diribetachtoinimized, we've been so conditioned to think, the way the Rebbe taught us to think, that we don't even appreciate the Pelesh of Adover. I heard a story, and I heard a story with a name. But I'm going to repeat it without a name. Why? Because I shouldn't have been told the name either. It was a big chassid who was beim Friedrich Rebbe yet, but the Rebbe, Friedrich Rebbe, and then by the Rebbe. So he once spoke in 770. And he told a story about what happened to him. Es chatoy ani maske. Ves a maise van a emes a maise, and a maise was his emes. Same madreges in emes. Yeah, a story that has in it an emes. It's a confession. You don't tell such a story unless you're prepared to. If you see the point. He said he was a younger man, and the Friedrich Rebbe called him in and sent him on a shlichus. A shlichus. He should move to a certain city and do a certain thing. I think he was already married. So he told the Friedrich Rebbe, "Was will ich haben von them?" He told the Friedrich Rebbe, "What am I going to have from it?" And you have to understand, he asked that question. In my mind, there's no doubt, because this is what he heard from his mashpil. This was Amalek Chabad. I am a Yid. I have to serve the Eibishter. I have to close to Atzmos Amhus. The Rebbe sends you a shlichus. So you're not saying, "What am I going to have and how much money am I going to make?" How is this going to be closer to the Eibishter? So this was already in America, yeah. America was a whole other Rebbe. So could you imagine saying that to the Friedrich Rebbe? Could you imagine? Anyway, he was a Chassidish Yid. He wasn't a oisvorf. It wasn't business. It was ruchnius. The Rebbe told him to go on a shlichus. So he said to the Friedrich Rebbe, "What am I going to have from it?" And the Friedrich Rebbe looked at him. I heard from people that the Friedrich Rebbe's eyes were even more fiery than the Rebbe's. Friedrich Rebbe, you took a look at you could fall down. He didn't answer his question, but he gave him a look that was much more than an answer. Like, you don't want to know. You don't want to even ask that question. So he told the story about Fabring. But here in 770, a big Fabring, and he was trying to make a point. He says, by this Rebbe, you wouldn't even think to ask that question. Not you wouldn't ask it. You wouldn't think to ask that question. You wouldn't, it would cross your mind. It's such a stupid question. What am I trying to articulate here is that the Rebbe has changed the paradigm. The Rebbe really changed the yisod. What's a chassid? That you makarev another person. The whole idea that a chassid is I come closer to the Eibishter, which half a Tanya talks about that. Right here in our Pedek, L'kashin nafshe ba'avayeh. You know, this has become du zogst als du darfst and avos darf medir zogst gegonisht. It's a change. It's no doubt. The Rebbe, the Friedrich Rebbe started when he came to America, but the Rebbe's whole metzius is you are a chassid because you're makarev another yid. And this is already a higher madrega l'shma. And today it's push it aleph base. You give it to the babies in their milk. From birth, you raise a Yiddish kid that your Yiddishkeit is not defined, versteht sich, you have to be an Ehrlicher Yid, you have to be a Frumme Yid, and Yiddishkeit is not Mashpia. But your whole Metzias is to be Makara Matzveitin Yidin. And this has become the Aleph base. And it's the Chiddush of the Deir HaShvi, of the Rebbe, and in more general ways, it's the Chiddush of Chassidus in America. So I wanted to share all of that, and I managed to spend more time than I intended. Let's learn. So I'm telling you again where I am starting, okay? I'm starting on page Tester, it's page 18. V'zois ma'ila gedei live in the flow. V'zois is the last word on the line. It's 15 lines from the bottom. Yeah, you see it? It's by the period. Mishkol tzadupina, period, v'zois. Now we read this already twice. But mitzvah now we're going to finish the Pedic. At least that's the plan, okay? So the Alter Rebbe, v'zois ma'ila yeseda. This is an extra level. Gedei live in the flow and catch, which is higher and more wondrous in an infinite way. Asher b'mitzvahs yediyas ha'toira v'hasagasa. It's in the mitzvah of knowing Hashem and having a reach and an understanding in Elokus. I'll call ha-mitzvahs maisius over mitzvahs that you do in behavior, in action. Va'afilu al-mitzvahs atluyas b'dibur. It's even more than mitzvahs you do with speech, where you say Akima Svasim have a maiseh. Va'afilu al-mitzvahs talmud teira shabadibur. Even the aspect of learning teira, which is the mitzvah, which is saying the words of your mouth. Teira is a milo of mitzvahs. And what is that? So the Rebbe says, when a Yid does a mitzvah, whether he's speaking or acting, HaKadosh Baruch Hu malbish es. Hashem becomes a shirt, a garment around us. The mitzvah is atzmus and we had this in the previous Pedic and Pedic Dal. The mitzvah is Eibishter, as they state. Leis machshol tvisa betkal. Tvisa with a besh of Teda was a mitzvah is the Eibishter himself. So when you're doing a mitzvah, the Eibishter is your shirt. He's wrapping himself around you. Umakifa eravaya, and he surrounds you through this garment with the light of Hashem. Your whole person is enveloped by the garment of Elokus and the light of Elokus. As opposed to Obiyadiyas HaTeira. When Yid is knowing Teira in his mind and he's understanding it, so Movad, in addition to the fact that his mind is now surrounded by the wisdom of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And of course, you all know and you all understand that when you say that a Yid's mind is surrounded by the wisdom of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, you also mean the Ein Sof, right? It's not just understanding, intellect. The Ein Eliki. So Hashem's wisdom and Hashem's light is surrounding you like a shirt. Continues the Rebbe and he says, Hinegam chochmas havaya bekirbe. In addition, the wisdom of the Eibishter and the Ein Sof of the Eibishter is within you, like food in your stomach, you're digesting it. Masha seichel, that your mind, masig, v'tefes, or makif, reaches, grasps, and envelops. B'sichle, in its intelligence and its intuition. Masha efshalei litfes, ulahasig, anything that's possible for this person to grasp and to reach. And again, notice the reversal of the order. The line before it says masig, v'tefes. Now it says tefes or masig. Yeah, this I'm just pointing it out. Miyadiyas HaTeira, the understanding of the Teira, ish kefi sichli, each one according to his understanding, ukakeach, and the possibility, yidiyasei, of his knowledge, bepadis, in the pshat, remez, drush, and saw that all madregas of Teira. Says the Rebbe. Ulafi, and whereas, and since, shabidiyas HaTeira, as we just explained, when a person is knowing the Teira, in addition to Teira being a garment around you, it's also true that Teira is enclosed within the soul of the person. Vesichle, and his mind, and it's enveloped within them. In other words, not just that Teira is a garment around me, but I'm, so to speak, a garment around the Teira. This is why Teira is called food. Because when you eat food, it goes into your system, it becomes one with you. And then, of course, you break it down. And you break it down in a healthy way. The food becomes you, and you become the food. Right? The food becomes you. This is called Yispanis Aminei. You have Panasa from the Teira. And the food becomes you. This is called La'afoshallah. You give back the Teira based on who you are. It's a new Teira. L'chein, therefore, Nikras b'shem lechem u'mazen ha'nefesh. The Teira is called bread and nourishment for the food. And the last 3 lines, or 2 lines on page 18. just like physical bread. Zonis aguf nourishes the body. When he brings it inside of himself, mamish. And of course, it's not just you take it in and you give it out, but it's transformed it to be the blood and the flesh of the person who's consumed it. And only when you break it down, only when you digest it and it becomes you and you become it, do you live. And you'll be sustained. The same is also true. Top of page Yud now when it comes to knowing Teda. And reaching it in the neshama of a person, Shalem the hate, everyone learns it properly well. With the examination of his mind. Your brain holds it, grasps it. It becomes one with you. Until you and the Teda become inseparable. The Teda becomes you, that's called Yispanis, that you become the Teda. It's called Yispanis, and the Teda becomes you. This is called La'afah Shalom. Become one nasa mozin v'nefesh. Teda becomes a life for your neshama. Mozin means nourishment for your neshama. V'chayim, and life bekirba inside the person. Mechayim means a baruch, the source of all life, which is the Eibishter himself. Hamalubah v'chachmasa v'teraseh shebekirba, which is invested in one's chokhmah and Teda, which is inside the person, and you become one with the Teda. V'zeh shekosa v'teraseh b'sechmeim. And this the Pshat is saying, tell him that the Teda is in my kishkes. The Teda is in my intestines. Me and the Teda become one. It says in Kabbalah, in Gan Eden, the mitzvahs are only garments. Now remember, this is model A. Remember, I just gave you a long introduction, which is a repetition of last week's entire class. That in the first model, the mitzvah is only a conductor of light, and only in the second model is the truth in the mitzvah itself. But at this point, Levusha and Neshamas Began Eden, the garments of Neshamas and Gan Eden mitzvahs, you put on a shirt. Why? Because of what the shirt's going to do for you. But it's not that the shirt has its own value. The shirt's going to bring to you the light. The shirt itself is only a conductor. La'asad Lavi, it's going to be different. V'ateda hi amazon l'neshamas. Teda is the food of the souls. Sha'osku b'tei be'lamazeh b'teda l'shma, that engage in this world in Teda l'shma for the sake of the Teda. And the Alter Rebbe teaches, and this, the last week and a half, this week, last week, and the end of the class before, was based on the following word: U'l'shma hainu. What's the taich? What is the meaning of l'shma at this point in Tanya? To connect your neshama to the Eibishter. In other words, when you learn Teda, you're doing yourself a favor, as opposed to what's written later on in the Tanya. The Asaga Teda, because one has an intellectual reach in the Teda, each one according to its intelligence. Says the Rabbi, the idea that Teda is food, this is an internal light, like a mamalakalam light. The Alavushim, and the idea that Teda and mitzvahs are garments, is makifas, indirect light. Lachein Omer Razal, which explains what it says in the Mishnah, we say it every day in davening. What does it mean that Teda equals to all of the mitzvahs? Of course, there's many reasons why. Teda is equal to all of the mitzvahs, including the fact that mitzvahs are called the Eivarim the Malachim, the limbs of the Eivish, and Teda Eid. But here he says, mitzvahs are, quote, only, end quote, garments. Teda is food as well as a garment, l'nefesh hamaskelas, to the neshama of a yid who's called maskelas. Shemislabesh ba, that the Teda becomes enclosed within the person's neshama, be'iyuna v'limudah. When one examines the Teda and studies it. The koshke, this is even more true, that when one doesn't only learn the Teda with his mind and his eyes, but he actually also says the words of the Teda, Sheheva Ladiba, that the air of his mouth becomes indirect light. When it's written in Kabbalah, we're not more paying attention. Jede Zach is da in Arichampin und in Ze'eram. Everything exists on a big level and on a little level. You know, the Friedeker was a child, and they were in Kharkiv. It's a famous story. It's printed in the Rishimas HaMaaseh, that they went, it's called Masa Yalta. The Rebbe Rashab took along the Friedeker on one trip to the Crimea. He used to stay in Lubavitch with his grandmother, and his father would go with his mother. But this trip he took him along. On the way back it was Lag B'Omer, and they stopped in Yalta, in Kharkiv, which is a big city shtat in the Ukraine. And there was a Fabrengen, and the Rebbe was crying. The Rebbe was crying. So the Frierdiker Rebbe said to his mother, Mama, was weinst du? So she said, Du bist noch ein Kind. Du verstehst nicht. You're a kid, you don't understand. He went into the Fabrengen, that was 6. Mem Zayin, he was almost 7. And they carried him over the heads of the Chassidim. And he stood next to his father. So the whole story how they gave Mishtikul Muzenis and Mashkins and L'chaim. And then he leaned over and he whispered in his father's ear, the Mama ist in the anderen Zimmer umgeht. Mother is sitting in the other room and she's crying. So he says to him, the Rebbe Rashab, geh auf the Mama, als ich fühl sich besser. The Kopfetik is weg. Tell your mother I'm feeling better. He was very ill. Nobody knew how sick he was. And the worst thing for his illness was emotional exertion. Because the whole illness was a psychological thing. He was carrying the burden of a Rebbe. And Fabrengen with Chassidim was a mamash sakona. And the people in the room could not even appreciate it. So she was crying, she carried this. And it's one of the things which is so interesting with Rebbe Rashab. I didn't, by any other Rebbe, the Rebbe Rashab always traveled with his wife. Always. Even when the Fiedeke was a child. They always were together. Whenever the Rebbe Rashab traveled, even long trips, she was with him. That's how it was. The Rebbe Tzanifke held down the fort in Lubavitch. The Rebbe never went, by the Rebbe Marashi you don't find such anhoga, by the Fiedeke you certainly don't find such anhoga. But the Rebbe Rashab always traveled with the Rebbe Tzanishtan, always with his Rebbe Tzanishtan, Alamo. And she carried she was responsible for him. She had to look after him. And he wasn't an easy patient, as we all understand, yeah? Anyway, so behemshach that Sipa van die Sipa. When the Fabrengen was over, so the Chassidim, this was the Rebbe's son, haben sich mishtasheh gewesen. They were playing, they were having a good time. They were enjoying the Fiedeke Rebbe was a child. So the Fiedeke Rebbe asked him, it says the names of the Chassidim. One of them was Lazarov or Alzarov. It says the names of the Chassidim that he was talking to. And the Fiedeke Rebbe said, was hat der Tata eigentlich gesagt? You must understand, the Rebbe Rashab was the youngest guy in the room. He was 25 years old. And the Chassidim in that room, with some of them were the Chassidim from the Tzemach Tzedek. It was a whole situation was really odd. The Rebbe was so young. The Rebbe Rashab was so young. He was 25 or 26 years old. And the Anash were much older than him. Many of them. But he was Rebbe. So the Fiedeke Rebbe says, what did my father teach you? So one of them told him, the Tata to the Eizgeleg, was meint a Chosid? Your father taught us what's the meaning of Chosid. So the Fiedeke Rebbe stands up very tall, and he says, Mir hat es the Tata shen gesagt, mit 6 Chodoshim Tzedik. And I knew before you. My father told me 6 months ago what's a Chosid. The Fiedeke Rebbe was proud. I knew before you. It was a Yidden of Eisabad. My father told me 6 months ago. So he said to the Fiedeke Rebbe, dir hat der Tate gesagt, was ist a Chosid. Uns hat gesagt, was ist a Chosid. The Fiedeke Rebbe tells this whole story, like I'm just telling it to you. I mean, I'm not verbatim, I don't have that kind of memory, but this is the Teichen Asiput. Your father said, what's a Chosid with a Lamed? And us, your father taught what's a Chosid. So everything is in grace and in claim. But a Chosid, not Chosid. To say that a Yid learns Torah, and the Torah doesn't have an effect on them on an neshama level is impossible. We all have the same problem. You're speaking for all of us. Yeah. No, to have a deeper than head, or more obvious than head, that was an aggressive chosid. But anytime a Yid learns Torah, there's no doubt that Hamor Shabbat Machzir L'Muta, Torah is Oy, Torah is Lichtikai, Torah is Alakus. So your point is appreciated. It's true. It's the emes. It's the emes. It's the emes. But the Torah does change us. You could learn something else. You could read a book. You can do something which is easier and more entertaining, and you come and take time from your life, and you come to learn Chassidus. To say that it doesn't have an effect is impossible. But then you want more. And one of the eitzes is B'simcha Tov Levav. The Rebbe taught us the solution to all of our Marash Chayde Simcha. So the answer to experiencing more, the Torah changes us, is to believe that it's real. The Rebbe once told the Rav Ashkenazi, the Kfar Chabad Rav, they gave out this Shabbos. Every Shabbos comes out of Fabrengen, and I always tell you about it. Every week comes out of Fabrengen from Hanachas Balahak. They call Teiras Menachem. So this Shabbos, the Fabrengen that they gave out was Chov Dal Tevis Hashem Lamed Beis. Chov Dal Tevis 1972. The Rebbe starts the Fabrengen, but this Fabrengen is a special. The Rebbe started with a Maimer, and the Rebbe was Magia the Maimer, which is very uncharacteristic in those days. And then the Rebbe said, this upbringing is going to a big simcha, because today arrived the Rebbe, the Maram Kemis, not the Rebbe Shulchan Aruch, which Rav Ashkenazi made. He wasn't even 30. He was less than 30. Faragon in his gewesen. The Sefer Maram Kemis that Rabbi Ashkenazi made is Goines. I heard that Rabbi Zalman Oivach had gesagt that it would take him 10 years to make the Sefer. Rabbi Ashkenazi was 28 years old. He made the Sefer in a few years. He was a moidendike gon and a moidendike masmid. Anyway, so the Rebbe made a special farbrengen for this. And the first Sikha, the Rebbe spoke, Maram Kemis and Al Rebbe Shulchan Aruch and Vinyan Vilchas Shabbos. This is the Sikha they gave us yesterday in Shul. I read it. I didn't finish, unfortunately. I like to finish, but I don't have time. Anyway, but Rabbi Ashkenazi had Yechidus. He spent a few years in America. One of his big schools was a few years in America. And in one of the Yechidus that he had with the Rebbe, he asked the Rebbe what he should do for Zikaron. What? He should remember what he learns. And the Rebbe told him, never say you don't remember. So the Kemun Zogna befilt nicht. And the Rebbe used to tell him.